Hello there, this is your host Des, and you're tuning in to DY Sensei, where we share knowledge from a variety of fields and help you maximize your health, relationship, and life's potential. Again, I'm Des, and I come from a background of preventive medicine and psychology with a focus on keeping you healthy, happy, and out of the doctor's office. This month, we've been setting the foundations for change. That's the right mindsets and knowledge to help you believe that change in yourself can happen, and it starts with you. This episode will be a continuation of last week's episode, a part 2 in our look at balance. If you haven't listened to last week's episode, be sure to check it out. For those who have listened to my past episodes, welcome back. I'll give you a little refresher and bring our new guests up to date. So, back to balance. Balance is a principle. It's a truth. That's where even nature gives us its best examples. If you deprive a plant of water, it wilts. But if you water it too much, it'll drown. Remember, balance is you seeing a spectrum and moving towards the center. It is you understanding the opposite dualities that exist and making sure that both have equal weights in your life. It's the yin and the yang, the dark and light halves that are interconnected and creates a whole. In the last episode, we explored the idea of neuroplasticity and how our brains change. We're rarely fixed into a particular way of thoughts or feeling. In that way, even our personalities can change from experience and knowledge. To build upon that, we'll look at balance in the 16 personality theory, our social interactions, and finally, our emotions. The 16 personality theory is quite a popular theory with a fun survey that you can do to figure out what you are and what you and your family personalities are, or what your tendencies might be. We're not sponsored by them or anything, but if you want to check it out, head to 16personalities.com and try the survey. So a little bit more about the 16 personalities. They're based off the Myers-Briggs type indicator and also the big 5 personality types that we mentioned in our last episode. They focus on 5 personality aspects. The first is energy, how we interact with our surroundings. The second is mind, how we see the world and process information. Third is nature, how we make decisions and work with emotions. Fourth is tactics, how we approach work and make decisions. And last, we have identity, how confident we are in ourselves. For each of these personality aspects, you get a letter or type. So each of these personality types are made up of 4 letters, plus the last one about your personal confidence. Let's take a look at the first personality aspect, energy. You either get an I for introverts or an E for extroverts. Introverts tend to be those who want to be alone and they get tired from social interactions. When you're interacting with them, you could probably tell if they're an introvert or not based on how quiet and reserved they are. We often see them as low energy compared to the extroverts who are high energy. They, on the other hand, thrive in group settings and are very sociable. Remember though, this is about energy and interactions with others. It's important to have a good balance in the energy you have around other people. The most successful people know how to turn the knob on their energy to match the circumstances regardless of their innate tendencies of being an introvert or extrovert. So, why is this so important? Well, a number of things. The amounts of energy you give off can signal to people how interested you are in them, how engaged you are with the situation, or even whether they should continue to interact with you or walk away from you. Altogether, it'll affect how people like you and judge you. Of course, you could be an introvert who's just quiet, but that might not cross the mind of the other person. Instead, they might think you're uninterested, you dislike them, or that you're being difficult. On the other hand, if you have too much energy as an extrovert, you might come off as being not sincere, but fake, overbearing, and even attention-seeking. There are also situations where you shouldn't be too high energy, like you're bouncing off the walls, like if you were attending a funeral or even comforting somebody who's going through a tough time. For these reasons, balance the energy you show and try to match it with the current situation and group you're with. The second personality aspect, the mind, is how we understand the world and process information. You get either an S for observance or an N for intuitive. Observant people are very practical people, and they focus on what they can see and prefer very straightforward answers. Meanwhile, you have your intuitive people who try to interpret things based on their feelings and imagination. If you're mainly an observant person, it means you always need to be attentive to your surroundings to gather information and make good decisions. Inattention from, let's say, when you're very tired from a long day of work could keep you from being attentive and gather the information you need to respond effectively with others. Another part to this is that if you prefer straightforward outcomes only, you'd be less creative and think outside of the box to find creative solutions. It takes imagination and sometimes even your gut feelings to figure things out at times. When people are communicating with you and not telling you something directly, it's important to gather information from their nonverbal cues like their facial expressions, tone of voice, and even body language. From this information, you're interpreting it and sometimes even getting gut feelings telling you what you should or shouldn't say or do. Another reason for tapping into the intuitive parts of yourself is that complex problems often don't have simple and straightforward solutions. You need to tap into your creative mind and gut feelings to figure out what's causing particular problems. Let's say, for example, your weight. You're struggling a lot with your weight, and the straightforward solution could be just exercise or diet. Still, there could be a lot more to uncover. It could be sleep or even your social group that is directly and indirectly affecting your weight, and maybe even these so-called direct solutions like diets and exercise. Being sleep deprived could be causing hormone imbalance in your body, and maybe your body's ability to metabolize and break down fats is now lower, and you also feel more hungry than usual. Then there's the social group, where maybe you're hanging around people who love to binge on unhealthy foods like fast food. Everybody's always getting the extra large combos, and you'd feel left out if you didn't join the bandwagon. This just shows how important it is to tap into our intuitive sides. Now let's take another look on the other side. If you're ever only intuitive, you're going to seem delusional. You come up with these fantastical stories to interpret straightforward solutions and might sound like a conspiracy theorist or even a maniac. So as we kind of discussed before, right? Even when you need to rely on your gut feelings and interpret something, like an angry partner who wants the dishes done but doesn't voice it, you need to observe the nonverbal cues. Don't always be interpreting things like there's a hidden meaning behind every action though, because sometimes you'll just be overthinking things. And there's a lot of times where people just don't have an underlying motive to their words or even action. The next personality aspect is nature. We've got T for thinkers and F for feelers. Thinkers champion objectivity and rationality. Logic is the way, and emotions, well, they're just in the way. Because of this, they might hide or even suppress their emotions. Then we've got the feelers, who are sensitive to emotions from others, and themselves are very emotionally expressive. They often strive for harmony, cooperation, and even empathy. Which of the two are you? I'll be honest, I myself used to be very far on the feeler side in high school and even early post-secondary. Later in grad school, there was a short time I was far on the thinker side when I realized that emotions can be too fickle and just sometimes outright unreliable. When you're trying to solve problems, thinkers come up with your practical solutions. You need logic to make sense of the world and find good solutions. Let's give you an example. Your brother lost his job recently, and he's been moping around, depressed and ruminating about how terrible his life is. Now, let's say it's been a whole year, and he's still in this state, depressed and jobless. As a logical person, what would you do? Even if you didn't empathize with him or comfort him over his loss, you might take him out still to get physically and socially active to bring up his spirits. To address his job problem, maybe you'll recommend him some different job posting you've seen, or maybe even bring him into the company that you're working at. If you were entirely a feeling person though, you might listen to his problems and comfort him about his loss. If you only took care of his feelings and didn't bother thinking about the logical ways to bring him out, well, he's probably still hiding under the blankets as a jobless bum. Now, in this way, logical people can help people find real and good solutions to their problems at a much quicker pace. They're efficient. Extreme feelers, though, they tend to overvalue feelings and disregard logic, keeping those people who they're trying to help in a rut. It becomes a pity party, and even if things do go forward, it might take a much longer time to get to a solution. Now, that isn't to say that logic triumphs over feelings, but feelings do play a crucial role in good decision making, and when paired with good logic and rationality, that's when it truly shines. Without feelings, you become a psychopath who doesn't feel empathy or remorse, and you take advantage of others, or you might even neglect those you should care about. Here's an example. So if you and your partner just had a newborn child recently, your partner has always wanted to be a missionary though, to do some good works in a third world country on the other side of the globe. Your partner is willing to drop everything, family, friends, home, you and the child included, to do this for the next 5 years. What do you think about the situation, and how would you feel? Well, logically speaking, your partner would probably do lots of good work and be fulfilling a lifelong dream of theirs, maybe even more than what could be done raising a single child at home. But if your partner was empathetic though, your feelings would be considered and your partner wouldn't want to neglect the duties of parenthood, especially during the child's most important stage of life. This just goes to show how important feelings are in making good decisions. Talking about feelings, we should probably explore the topic of goodwill, sympathy, empathy, and compassion. Goodwill is wishing well for others. Then you have sympathy, which is the feeling of sadness and pity for somebody's misfortune. Basically, that's being emotionally moved by somebody else's distress. Empathy, though, is usually considered the next level of sympathy. It's putting yourself in the shoes of the other person and trying to understand and feel what they feel. And at last, we've got compassion. That's the combination of goodwill and empathy together. You understand and feel what the other person is going through, and you wish for the best for them. The last two levels, empathy and compassion, helps move us closer to the person emotionally and figuratively into their positions too. People of high emotional intelligence are very empathetic people. They're able to listen attentively and be fully present. They put themselves in the other person's shoes and they manage their own emotions while avoiding making assumptions. That's different from people with low emotional intelligence, where they're less able to regulate their emotions and have empathy. Nowadays, there's often a bit of a misconception about emotional intelligence, where people think that if you're emotionally intelligent, you have to be emotionally expressive to the extent where you're emotionally explosive. That's the complete opposite, of course, because that's a lack of emotional control. But we'll save that for a future talk on emotional intelligence. Now back to empathy. Empathy is a powerful and wonderful tool that takes relationships to the next level. When you're empathetic, you put yourselves in the shoes of the other person, and we're better able to understand, care, and even love that person. Still, that is a tool, and that must be utilized carefully and with balance. Now let me explain why. Empathy also has a dark side to it. When you're being too empathetic, you're figuratively putting yourself in the position of the other person. You feel what they feel, especially when they're in turmoil. That can come with a boat's load of negative emotions. And for this reason, we sometimes feel great anguish and sorrow to the point where we cry alongside the other person. It can take a really terrible toll on our well-being as well because of this. You might feel anxiety, agitation, anger, and sometimes even depression. Where for the rest of the day or week, you're just distracted by thoughts of that person, even to the point where you can't fall asleep. If you're an empathetic person but fail to regulate your own emotions and take a step back, it only creates a pity party that perpetuates this cycle of problem and negativity. Now this is why logic and empathy are important together. It helps the distressed person much more. With logic alone, the person may feel defensive, unheard, and even not understood, making them less likely to take action to change their situation. With empathy alone, you risk creating a pity party that only continues that pain and negative emotion. Think of it this way. You're trying to help a friend stuck deep in a water well. Logic without empathy is essentially you yelling out instructions of how to crawl out of the well. If your friend has already thought of that, he would have climbed out by himself already. Now, empathy, on the other hand, is you literally jumping into the well to be there with him. You're literally in the same place as he is now. You understand how he thinks and feels about the situation at the bottom, but now you're both stuck in there. This isn't a situation you want to be in. But if you use empathy in a balanced way, you're keeping most of yourself out of the well, while reaching in with a hand or maybe even half of your torso in. You're keeping yourself rooted outside of the well while having a parts of yourself in to pull your friend out. That is how you should utilize empathy. You need to put a parts of yourself in the person's shoes while being rooted outside of the situation, or take a step back as necessary to pull them out of their own despair. From these examples, remember, even feelings and empathy needs to be balanced. Now, going back to the 16 personalities, we have the next personality aspect, tactics. That's our way of approaching and handling work. We've got J for judging and P for prospecting. Judging people are very thorough, highly organized, and structured people. They keep very well kept notes and puts things into their calendars to keep a very tight schedule. Prospecting people, though, they are more of your spontaneous and improvising type. They're relaxed, flexible, and they just go with the flow. Generally, I do have to say that if you want to get things done efficiently or even at all, you must have structure and order in your life. That's me speaking as somebody who has been on both sides of the spectrum. Without having a timeline in mind, you are less likely to complete things in time or even at all. When I used to study for 5 different courses on top of volunteering and working, I always had a timeline or schedule in mind of how much time I needed to dedicate to each activity. When you have multiple competing tasks like this, it's important to have structure and order so nothing is forgotten. Being spontaneous and flexible has its own charms. You'd seem natural, easygoing, and unexpected surprises are less likely to throw a wrench into your plans and make you panic. But the biggest problem is that, as I've mentioned before, you're less likely to complete other responsibilities you have, and sometimes even tracking of it isn't possible. This is like the moments when I've gamed, watched TV, or even read books for hours whenever I please and however I pleased. I even lost track of the day of the month sometimes. As I've said, structure and order is vital in any operation, but if you go too far, and you have another problem in itself. Somebody who is super reliant on order and structure crumbles at even the smallest wrench thrown their way. Think of somebody you know who always needs to have their schedule, and absolutely everything goes into their calendar. They get super distressed whenever something unexpected happens and they need to change it. It's, as I've said in the past, be the one to act upon instead of being acted upon. Don't let your schedule be the one that controls and sets you, but be the one who controls and sets your schedule. For this reason, I find it to be most important to have a good order and structure, as it lets you continue to build upwards like a tower, but also be able to handle any unexpected situation with ease. Real life will always bring you many surprises, and you need to be ready to handle them. Create flexibility in that order and structure, otherwise even the smallest earthquake can make your whole tower crumble. Now, the final personality aspect is identity, that describes how confident we are, how neurotic we can be, and even how we push ourselves to achieve our goals. We've got A for assertive and T for turbulent. A, assertive people, are confident and self-assured. Their moods don't swing too crazily and they're quite resistant to stress. But they also tend to be so reassured in themselves, they tend not to worry too much or push themselves too hard in achieving their goals. Compared to the turbulent people who are self-conscious and sensitive to stress, they're likely to be the ones to panic, have big mood swings, and they might be perfectionists who are so focused on succeeding, they might be seen as anxious under pressure and stress. As somebody who's been on both sides of the spectrum, I have to say that it feels much better to be assertive. After much experience, you learn to be confident in your own ability and handle any unexpected situations. A little philosophy that I have for myself is that I don't need to worry about most things. If it's within my control, I don't need to worry about it, but just work on getting it done. If it's not within my control, though, I don't need to worry either, because that's just going to cause unnecessary stress, suffering for myself. Sometimes it's easier said than done, of course, for example, in sickness and disease. Okay, so turbulent people, though, they feel a lot of stress and worry constantly about how others view them. Because they're sensitive to stress, they're also very moody and can scare most people off just with their mood swings. Their drive for success and perfection is fueled by their fear of failure, and they can be quite anxious when they don't meet their standards that they set for themselves. In the worst case scenario, those negative emotions can also be the very thing that paralyzes them, keeping them from moving steps forward. For this exact reason, I emphasize the need for balance. We need to be relaxed and confident in ourselves to a degree, while being fueled by fear of not meeting our own standards or even the standards of others. Now, whether you believe there's a higher being that created us or that we evolved from microbes, there's one deep truth. We have negative emotions for a reason. It's because it's beneficial. And people and society who pushes away or demonizes these emotions are wrong to do so. Whether it is shame, guilt, anger, sadness, fear, or even disgust. All of these negative emotions, they do have a role. They tell us something is wrong and something needs to be changed. Whether it is our circumstances or even our perception of something. Negative emotions are the strongest drivers for change because naturally we don't want to dwell on them, right? In that sense, it's a tool so that we can use and achieve the results we want. For example, if you were given a plate of cockroaches to eat, you might be super disgusted. This feeling is telling you, A, the situation is wrong, eating cockroaches is bad for you because they're dirty and could make you sick. Or B, your perception or attitude towards the situation is wrong. Maybe you're in another country with a culture that makes these cockroaches into delicious and healthy sources of protein, and you've never thought of that before, but you need to change your way of thinking about this issue. Well, now we know why we should not dismiss these feelings in ourselves or even in others, but habits move us towards action. Still, it's as my favorite Harry Potter character, Snape, or Alan Rickman had said in the movie, control your emotions, discipline your mind. You need to control those negative emotions. Don't let those negative emotions overpower you, such that you're paralyzed into inaction. And great. Now that was the last personality aspect that we had to go through. Personality tests are great and fun, but they're not always very accurate unless you're at the far end of each spectrum. They have trouble fitting people who fall into the middle into certain personality types, and we call those people who fall into the middle ambiverts. Ambi, which is Latin for both or around. From my experiences, and having observed people for several decades, the most successful and efficient and even more mature people tend to find a balance in all of these traits. And that sums up this episode. We want to keep a good balance in our personality traits and interactions with others. There are 5 main parts to it. 1, the level of energy we exude, balancing our introverts and extroverted selves. 2, how we gather information and working with it. We want to tap into both our intuitive and observant sides. 3, working with people and problems, both thinking and feeling. Even empathy needs balance. 4. Having structure and order while being able to go with the flow. And number 5, we need to be confident and utilize those negative emotions to achieve our goals. Be sure to tune in to our next episode where we'll talk about confidence, humility, and beating back the hurdles to change. If you enjoyed this episode, please tune in to our next episodes every Tuesday morning. If you found it engaging or helpful, please give your feedback in the comments. Make sure you rate and follow the podcast and share it with your friends and family. The success of this podcast hinges on this. And if you don't, you're showing an imbalance in your appreciation for me. If you have any questions or you want to share your knowledge or experiences on this podcast, be sure to contact me at dysensei@dysstudios.com. That's dysensei@dysstudios.com. With that said, class dismissed.